fastest fat boy, part 4. The bike's really starting to live up to its name. I did a bunch of performance upgrades to it. S&S Super Stock cylinder heads with the matching high compression pistons. Takes the engine from 8.5 to 1 compression to 10 to 1 compression, which brings up the horsepower right there. S&S 562 cam, Jim's lifters, adjustable push rods, Carl's Speed Shop Typhoon carburetor, which runs really good on it. Upgraded the camshaft bearing. I put the brass and bronze Indian Larry Harley-Davidson pushrod tube collars on here. And right away you can hear and feel the performance difference. Okay, here's the horsepower upgrade for the world's fastest fat boy. I got the S&S Super Stock heads. These are for standard bore, and they have a matched piston that you can see is CNC machined to match the combustion chamber. That's one of the things that really makes these heads flow, gives them high compression, and creates that horsepower. In order to make those heads breathe, I'm going to replace the stock cam with an S&S 562. Got some big lobes. Not super big, but big enough to really make some fun power. You've got to replace the cam bearing when you replace these cams, because if you don't, that big cam will destroy the factory cam bearing. And this engine has 30,000 miles on it, and a set of hydraulic tappets from an Evo are good for about 40,000 miles. I got a set of Jim's tappets to put in it, just because I don't want to risk losing those tappets 10,000 miles from now or sooner. I've got adjustable push rods to replace the stock steel push rods that are in the motorcycle. And then I've got these push rod tube collars. 2 of them are from Indian Larry, the Indian Larry question mark, and they're taking care of business. And then a 2 Harley-Davidson bar and shield. Got a top end gasket kit, cam cover gasket kit, cylinder base gaskets, and a set of Jim's roller rockers. And if it will fit, I've got another Carl's Speed Shop Typhoon carburetor, constant velocity, big billet from Carl's from the late 90s and early 2000s. Should run good with this engine, with this horsepower upgrade. So if it'll fit with my exhaust pipe, that's one on there too. Let's get to work. Get these fuel tanks off and out of the way. Raise up the HMC lift. Get the bike to where it's a better level for me to work on. I gotta remove the exhaust. Remove the carburetor so I can get the intake manifold off. We got to remove the intake manifold. Here's my intake manifold trick. I have a little piece of a 1/4 inch Allen wrench that I cut off years ago. And so to get these intake manifold bolts off, I put the Allen wrench piece in there and use a 1/4 inch wrench, box end wrench. It makes it really easy to get these out, because it's pretty hard with a regular Allen wrench. I got these rocker boxes off the cylinder heads. I got these head bolts broken loose. I'll get these heads off, pull the cylinders, and I'll start taking the bottom end apart and start getting all my horsepower parts inside this thing, and then reverse the order and go back and do my reassembly. There's your Evolution cylinder head off. I'm going to reuse these cylinders, but I got to take them off because I'm going to put new gaskets underneath them for one thing, and the other thing is I'm changing the pistons, because the pistons that I bought for this engine match the S&S Super Stock cylinder head, so they have special pistons that really make them run. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the cylinder off. with the rear. I gotta take these pistons off. So there's a little snap ring right in here. And notice I wrapped rags around the cylinder spigots, around the rods. And the reason I do that is so nothing can fall down inside the engine. And when I take these clips out, if they were to try and fall inside the engine, it'd be really hard to get them out. So I wrap the spigots with rags so that I don't have anything fall in there. No dust or dirt from the shop can get in there. I just go ahead and pull this ring out. There's a little wrist pin keeper that keeps that wrist pin inside the piston. I've got these wrist pins pulled out. There's my front piston. Always check these, when you take them out, just to make sure there's nothing going on inside the engine. But this thing only had 30,000 miles on it. Really low wear. Everything looks pretty good. I'll just give these a nudge with a soft mallet. There's my tappet assemblies. I showed you I have gems to replace these with. I'm going to go ahead and pull this nose cone off this engine so I can change the cam and the cam bearing. Got to get the chopper zinc timer cover off. Then you pull your timer plate back. I remove the rotor. It's screwed into the end of the cam. I'm ready to remove the nose cone cam cover. This is going to be an oil event, so I have oil drip pan down below to catch that. I'm going to go ahead and push the cam in as I pull the cover off, just to leave it in there, just so I can take a look at everything. You need this little spacer, goes on the end of the breather. You always got to make sure you grab that. My breather gear. I want to make sure it's good. There's no cabbage in it. It's plastic, so I want to make sure that the teeth are all good. Here comes the camshaft. This is the cam bearing right here. I need to get it out of the case. So I've got a cam bearing removal tool. I'm going to show you how this thing works. This taper will collapse inside the bearing because the tool is cut. So I'll knock it in there. And then there's a rod that goes down the middle. What the rod does is it keeps it from being able to collapse when you're pulling back out. I'm going to gently tap that in there. Now it's in. And once I put the rod down the middle, it's going to expand the tool so that it can't come out. And then this sleeve goes over the tool. And as I turn this nut with a wrench, it's going to pull that bearing out of the bore in the case. So here goes. There's a tool. That's the old cam bearing. I have the cam installation tool to do this. Let me show you a way you can do it on your own if you don't have the tool and you don't have a lathe to make one. I just put the new cam bearing on the cam. Line the cam up with the pinion so that gear's in alignment. And use the cam and the thrust washer as a tool to knock it in. Now I pull it out, you can see that that bearing is starting to go into the bore straight because the cam is driving it in straight. So the cam makes a good tool to install that if you don't have the right tool. My new cam bearing's installed. This is my new cam that's going in. I am gonna show you how I shim the cam. So I'm gonna leave the gasket on it, put the cam cover back on, and check my cam end play because it has to float in the engine. It can't be too tight, and if it's too loose, it'll make a hell of a lot of racket. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the bolts in this cam cover and show you how I check that. I got my fingers on the cam and I'm moving the cam east and west in the motorcycle you know, from the left side of the bike to the right side of the bike and back and forth. And that's my camshaft end play. So what I'm going to do is put a feeler gauge in this little gap back here, and it'll tell me exactly how much end play I have. And then I can adjust it with different thickness cam washers, which is what I'm rolling in my finger right here. So here's my 10 thousandths feeler gauge. The Harley manual gives you a lot of range for the cam end play. I like it 10 to 15 thousandths, so that's where I think they run the best. You can see that just gets in there. It's a pretty snug fit, so it's probably 10, 11 thousandths, which is perfect for where I need to be. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the cam cover back off and install everything in the bottom end here. It's pretty hard to see. I've been looking for it for a couple minutes, but right here is a little mark in between these teeth on the pinion gear. That is my timing mark for the camshaft. And there's two marks on the cam. This one here goes to the pinion, and this one here goes to the breather. So I'm going to go ahead and slide the cam in and line up these two marks right here. And then I'm going to slide the breather gear back in the breather bore. The notch right there on the breather gear by my index finger is going to line up with the other one on the camshaft right there. Go ahead and put my breather thrust washer back on. Go ahead and put a new cam cover gasket on. It's got these two dowels to hold it in place. I'm going to line the cam cover back up with the pinion and the camshaft. All right, I got the cam cover back on. I got the timing rotor cup back in there. Now I'm going to go ahead and put my timing pickup back in, and I made a mark when I took it apart where it was, and now this is probably going to be a little bit off because that gold cup that's behind there that rides in a notch in the end of the camshaft, and the notch in the end of the camshaft may not be in the exact right spot, but I'm going to put it here for now. This should have me really, really close to where I need to be, and I go back and time it with a timing light later. Okay, so I'm going to pull my stock tappets out and put my Jim's units in there. I just want to make sure that they fit, that they slide easy. They do. You always want to check. Tappets want to fall down when you drop them in. So I catch my fingers under there. I just kind of go pretty quick and drop it in there and hope everything lines up, and it does. When you put your lifter blocks in, you have to have this little alignment tool. It'll center and align the lifter block so that the tappets run straight on the camshaft lobes. So I've always been told it's critical. I've always used it. I'm gonna use it because I have it. It doesn't cost that much money. I recommend if you're doing this on an Evo, buy it or borrow it from somebody. I get that in, then I go ahead and put the other ones in. These are the S&S wrist pins, and I always want to check and make sure they have a good fit in the bushings. If they're too tight, that's bad. So I got them both checked out. They both fit nicely. So I ran a stone through the cylinders just to clean them up a little bit. The piston and wall fit was really good. The cylinders are still standard bore and the pistons are standard, so I have a really good fit. I checked my rain gap, everything is good to go. You see they're clean on the inside, so I'm gonna go ahead and put some oil in these cylinders just to lubricate them for going on, and I'm gonna drop them down over the pistons. The comparison of the Harley-Davidson Evo head and the S&S Super Stock head. These Super Stock heads are used, but they're in really great condition. You can see it was running really rich. Both valves are black. They're loaded with carbon. You know, it should be more of a color like this. This one was a little lean, but you can see how I have that coffee with cream color on the valves and the spark plug. And that's what you really want. So whoever had this thing on here, they had this thing running way too rich. They're definitely losing horsepower with it because it was so rich. I'm gonna get this one after 15, 20 miles. All that black carbon will be burning up those valves and they'll be looking like these. I'll richen it up a little bit. The Evo has a flat top piston and the chamber has a flat wall here to give it its squish. And the Super Stock head has a piston that's contoured to fit up into the combustion chamber here, and it's got what they call a bathtub shaped chamber. It also has different intake and exhaust ports, so these heads are gonna make a lot more horsepower than the stock Harley-Davidson head, especially once I get it tuned right. I got new head gaskets on. Here goes the rear S&S Super Stock head. And the front head. So I've installed the intake manifold for the Speed Shop Typhoon carburetor. I mean, this carb and manifold is considerably bigger than the S&S Super E. This carb's the size of like a Super G carburetor, which might be a little bit much for an 80 cubic inch engine, but with these heads and the pistons and the cam, I'm hoping it'll flow it. So I'm just kind of preliminarily putting it on right now just to see if it'll even fit and clear the exhaust pipe. You know, the manifold's on loose, it's not on tight. I just wanted to even see if it would all fit before I got all the rockers and everything on it. All right, I'm torquing these cylinder heads. There's a sequence you have to go. You have to go from this side of the motorcycle, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you go 12 pounds, 22 pounds, then about to 40 pounds. So I'm on my last pull here, which is at 40 pounds. So I drop my intake and exhaust push rods in. I got my push rod tubes in. Put my rocker boxes back on the front. The rear's already done. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the front here and button this engine up. I got the Jim's roller rockers in there. New gaskets. Okay, engine's all buttoned up. Time to adjust my valves. I've got all the push rod tubes loose. You see I use clothespins. I've been doing it this way for years. I put clothespins on these push rods to hold the push rod tubes up while I adjust them, but they also give me a good visual indicator. So to adjust these valves, I'm gonna do one cylinder at a time. And what I'm gonna do is get the intake push rod on this cylinder to open and close. And when it's closed, I know that that's the compression stroke, and both of them should be closed. So I'm gonna put the bike in gear, roll my wheel over, and you'll see that push rod, intake push rod open and drop, which means that this cylinder is on the compression stroke and both valves are closed, and now I can adjust the push rods. For Evo valve adjustment with hydraulic tappets, you're gonna wanna extend this push rod 4 full turns. There's a couple ways to keep track of the full turns, but I'm just gonna make a mark on here with a silver Sharpie. You can count the flats on the nut, which there's 6 flats on the nut, so 4 turns would be 24 flats, but you can lose track of that if you get distracted or something happens. So with my mark, you know, it's pretty hard to make a mistake. And then I just hold the bottom of the push rod, and I'm gonna go 4 full turns. There's 1, and there's 4. And now I just bring the jam nut up and lock it down. I just extend the push rod tube in that O-ring. Get ready to get the exhaust back up in this bike. I gotta get these tanks back on here. So I'm ready to try and start the Fat Boy. I've got everything done on it. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen. You know, I drained all the fuel. There's no fuel in the carburetor. So it's probably going to take it a minute to suck fuel in because it has a vacuum operated fuel valve. So it'll probably take a few cycles for it to suck the fuel into the carburetor. and really fill that float bowl up. I've got oil, I got fuel in the gas tank, the gas is on, I've got spark. So it's also going to take a minute or two for those hydraulic tappets to pump up full of oil. So it might be loud for a second, but hopefully it fires to life pretty quickly. You can see these pipes are cold. I haven't run it. Let's see what happens. Oh boy. Definitely got a float issue, and the Carl Speed Shop car has been sitting for so long, it wouldn't surprise me. All that fuel leaking was the gasket for the Carl Speed Shop carburetor was destroyed, so I have another Carl Speed Shop Typhoon carburetor on below, so I put that on it. So let's see what happens now. Let me give it a try. Here's the spark plug out of my engine after about 125 miles of riding. Got a good color to it, just slightly maybe leaning toward the rich side, but that's good because it's a new set of pistons and rings, and I'd rather run it rich and a little bit cooler than run it hot. So really happy with how this thing's tuned and running.